In this episode, we're going to be thinking about chronic health issues. We're joined by Andrew and Kath Bruce. Andrew is a minister in Sydney, and he has suffered from some significant chronic health issues for many years. And Kath is a GP. I hope you find this episode helpful, as Andrew and Kath enable us to think about chronic health from a personal, theological, practical, and medical perspective. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to Moore College's Centre for Christian Living podcast. Today, I'm joined by Andrew and Kath Bruce. Andrew and Kath, it's great to have you with us. Maybe you could introduce yourselves. Andrew, tell us about yourself, particularly how you became a Christian, and then I'll hand it over to Kath.
Thanks, Pete. Nice to be here. So I'm currently the rector of the parish of Cooks River, which is at St Peters, so just south from where we are now. And we've been there 13 years. So becoming a Christian, I suppose there were two main parts of my life that were pretty significant. So my mum is a Christian, and I grew up going to Sunday school and church and those sorts of things. And when I was in first grade, there was an older lady who taught us scripture, and she told us we had to do a memory verse of John 3:16. And then she said, "Who wants to be friends with Jesus?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to do that. And if you did that, you got a Bible." And so she gave me an RSV Bible, which took me till the end of Moore College to be able to read well. But anyway, I think at that point, I really did only have an understanding of the gospel in terms of being friends with Jesus. And so it didn't really make any impact in my life. I treated Jesus like a get out of free jail card, like Monopoly. And then when I got to university, I met some Christians, and they were genuinely Christians. And I realised if both of us were calling ourselves Christian, clearly one of us wasn't being consistent with it, and that was me, and I had to change. So I decided to read the Bible. I thought if I'm going to be a Christian, I should read it. And so I started by reading a book that I didn't know, and so I started reading Isaiah. And I remember getting to chapter 6 and seeing the vision Isaiah had of the temple and just thinking, man, I'm a man of unclean lips and I'm in a world of trouble. And that played on me. I read a chapter a day for the next 2 years. And then the week after my 21st birthday, I was walking across a park in Yarramundi in northwest Sydney on surveying camp. And I just had this absolute moment of clarity, as it were, where I had to make a decision. I had to get in or out of the boat. Either Jesus was my Lord or he wasn't. And so from that point on, I would say I was properly Christian and came to seek to serve the Lord. And after a long chain of events, we wound up here.
That's wonderful. Kath, what about you?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. So I grew up in a Christian household, and there's not really one moment like Andrew had, but I do remember at a holiday camp in year 5 realising that I wasn't a Christian just because mum and dad were Christians, and I had to decide whether it was something for me, and I thought that it was. And so just over time, God's been gracious in bringing amazing Christians into my life and helping me grow and reading his word, and I've continued in that walk ever since. So, yeah.
Wonderful. So today we're talking about basically living with chronic health issues. And so, Andrew, you're in pastoral ministry. Kath, you're a GP. And so both uniquely qualified to speak about this issue, particularly, Andrew, since this is something that you struggle with. You want to just tell us a little bit about the kind of chronic health issues that you've struggled with recently and even before that?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. So I suppose this was a little bit of a long time coming for me, although I didn't know it at the time. So at the end of 2017, I suppose that was, again, a moment of clarity, to use the expression. I was in a rheumatologist's office, and he made me take off my shoes, and he looked at my toenails and my fingernails and said to me, "You have psoriatic arthritis," which is a psoriasis arthritis. They're related to that, but I didn't get the psoriasis, so it took them a long time to diagnose me because that didn't really present in the normal way. It's an autoimmune arthritis, so it's different to, say, osteo. Osteo is where you wear out joints, but autoimmune arthritis is like rheumatoid, most people know about. Psoriatic is similar to that. It's pretty debilitating. It's a systemic kind of arthritis, so I have it in every joint in my body, like every vertebra, jaw, everywhere. Basically, my shoulders don't get it. They're the only ones I don't notice it in. So it's pretty rough, to be honest. And probably for the 18 months before I got my diagnosis, I felt like I was actually grinding to a halt. Like I couldn't look over my shoulder. When I was driving the car, I had to turn around to see things behind me. So that's kind of was a turning point. And since then, it's been difficult to try and figure out how do we move forward with it. It has multiple aspects of how it affects you. So it can affect you with fatigue, There's the pain itself, there's the lack of mobility, there's a lack of energy that comes with it. And to a varying degree, mental health can be a significant issue related to it. But that's, I think, true of a lot of chronic health issues. Chronic health issues are a bit like, they say, Pringles. You can't have just one. They all intertwine. And so if you've got a chronic health issue, the chances of you having mental health issues going along with it and other things, they all intertwine. And so that's why it can be quite complex to try and unravel those things as well. So, yes, realistically, I can think back. It started when I was 14. I had unexplained swelling in joints and that kind of stuff, which I played a lot of football, so I just thought it was that. And in each major stage of my life, I think as autoimmune diseases are related to stress, so every time you stepped up a level, like taking on a new job, it would get a bit worse. Getting married is a whole new thing. Well, that got a little worse. Then I took on another new job, and then I came to college, and then I went into ministry, and each one of these steps, and then we had kids, each one of these steps probably just turned the ratchet up a bit. And then in 2017, it just was completely unavoidable. So anyway, we got a diagnosis for that. So since then, we've been trying to figure out how to live with it.
Kath, what is a chronic health issue? What makes it different from other health issues? And what are the complexities associated with a chronic health issue?
Yeah, totally. So a chronic health issue, I haven't looked up the definition, but I would imagine anything over about 6 months. But also a chronic health issue is something that is ongoing. So a cold or a flu or even like a pneumonia or something else like that, an infection, that's going to be over and done within some amount of time. Whereas a chronic health condition is something that we're not going to cure, we're going to manage. And it's going to go over probably the rest of your life, and we'll manage it. And so, of course, that comes with all sorts of issues. As Andrew's already said, mental health is number one. Pretty much anyone with a chronic health condition, you're going to see some anxiety and depression purely related to that, even if it's a chronic health condition that doesn't cause pain. So Andrew's chronic health condition does cause pain, so that's an added reason for anxiety and depression going hand in hand with that. Very similar kind of neurochemical pathways, so pathways in your brain. So they're very interlinked through pain, chronic pain, and mental health. Yeah, so I guess that's the difference in management versus the cure. That's probably the best way to say it. Andrew's one particularly was quite tricky to diagnose. It's not the commonest cause of arthritis, and particularly, as he said, he didn't get any of the skin issues with the psoriasis, those classic patches on your elbow and that kind of stuff. And so it was quite difficult to diagnose. So I was quite surprised when we got the diagnosis, and that was a bit hard for me as a medical practitioner. I thought I should have worked it out. But as it turned out, it was quite tricky. Also, he gets a variety where his joints aren't damaged much. So when we'd done scans and x-rays and things, his joints looked okay. But the tendons where they insert onto the bone around the joints are really very inflamed in his case. So his was quite tricky to diagnose. That can be a really tough part of chronic health conditions and autoimmune conditions particularly. So autoimmune being a massive umbrella for anything where the immune system, so your own body, is attacking the normal tissues of your body. And there's a whole raft of things. There's thyroid disease, there's gastrointestinal illnesses, there's a bunch of different autoimmune. It's a very big umbrella, but they can be a bit more tricky to control. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, perfectly. So Andrew, 2017, even though you've been suffering before 2017, you have this diagnosis. What has life looked like since then?
Yeah, since 2017. So diagnosis is a good thing, and that's useful because at least you've got a name on it. Up until that point, it's difficult. Like I genuinely felt like I was grinding to a halt, and you feel like, well, maybe I need to just slow down a little bit. And the more I slowed down, the worse things got, and the more I slowed down, and the worse things got. So it was really hard to work out what was going on. Getting a diagnosis was good because one, I'm not out of my mind and I'm not being a hypochondriac and I'm not just being soft or whatever. All those thoughts go through your mind, like maybe I'm being whingy, maybe this is just middle age, right? Like that comes through your mind. And I thought, no, this is pretty rugged. So that helped. And I think having a name on it, and also it helped you to understand, you go, you do need to manage yourself and you do need to manage this issue. So I can't expect to be doing what everyone else is doing. Like, that's just not an option for me. I can't do things in the same way. So I've got to do things differently. So that helped. But just because you've got a diagnosis doesn't mean you've got a plan of management. And that process has been awful, to be honest. Like so what are we, 6+ years now? And I think we're just starting to get to the point where it's kind of managed. And through that process, there's been all sorts of meds they put you on, and some of them are brutal. Different processes, different diets, different whole bunch of stuff. And I reckon 3 out of 4 of them have made me worse, not better, like made you really sick. So it's pretty rough. Like, it's not an easy path. I felt most of the time like I was swallowing spiders to catch flies. So that was pretty rough. So 2017, by the time I got to 2019, I thought, if I don't put a circuit breaker in here, I might not be in ministry much longer. So I took my long service leave. I took all of it, and I had a whole term off. And I think that just gave me a little bit of breathing space. I mean, we went away for 3 weeks. I'd do something with the kids in the morning, and in the afternoon I was done. So it wasn't a very exciting long service for a family, but it was like, I wanted to finish well. I don't want to have to drop out of ministry. I think what I do is important and I enjoy it. I think it's worthwhile. And so I've just got to think differently about how I do things. So we did that, and that helped and brought a bit of space. And so now we're kind of at the point where it's managed a bit, but I just have to be very realistic about my capacities. And also, what to say about autoimmune is they're incredibly variable. Like, they're not a set and forget thing at all. It's as variable as the weather in Katoomba. One moment it's boiling hot, the next moment it's freezing cold and mist. Like the other day, we were up there and everyone had to go home because it got too misty. It's like that. You wake up in the morning, you feel great. By lunchtime, something's gone horribly wrong. All sorts of stuff impacts on it. So every time I get a flu shot or a COVID booster, for the next week and a half, because it kicks off your immune system, I just get horrendous arthritis through all my body. And so I have to be realistic about how to manage that at that times. You just have to be relentless and non-negotiable on what you do with yourself, with your diet, with your time, with your energies. And you have to be really, really clear in your mind. What are absolute priorities? Like, what are nices? What must you do in order to do your role? And then where do you work outwards from there if you've got more energy, that kind of stuff. So I think, me being me, I'm pretty wired that way to having clarity over what I want to do and what I think I should be doing with my time. And so I think that has been an enormous benefit to me in this context. So basically, by the time I do working life and family life, that's it. I've got no energy left. If I have a big event, I have to then plan to have a little bit of a quieter time, so do something else. I can do reading, whatever. Best way of describing it is, it's like aging prematurely. That's what I would say. I was saying to my mum, I got a handwritten Christmas card from my pharmacist. Right? Like, what does that say?
For the second year.
And my mum was complaining because she got one for the first time. And I said, yeah, but you're 80, I'm 50. And that's the best describer I can give you. It's like suddenly you've aged overnight. And so you just have to be really in tune with where you're at and wise, really wise with how you spend your time and where you invest the energies you do have.
Kath, can you speak from a medical point of view? Why is it so difficult to treat? Why can't we just take a pill and fix it like so many other conditions?
Because you don't want to wipe out your immune system. It's really helpful for lots of other things. So you can put people on steroids and they get roid rage, they gain weight, and everything else goes to pot. So it's just that the immune system is really important and it's part of every body process, and you can't just turn it off. So you've got to work out how to turn it off. Now, psoriatic is tricky in that it does seem to be more variable than some of the other autoimmune. So, for example, thyroid, autoimmune disease, really easy. You just take stuff out, add a bit of thyroxine, good to go. Kind of. It's not quite that simple, but it's much more straightforward, right? But this is much more tricky. And so, as Andrew said, he's tried, there's sort of 3 injectables and a tablet. So we went through the whole range of those that are on the PBS. The other thing is, in Australia, you're limited by what is on the PBS. So it's a pharmaceutical benefit scheme. So what the government is happy to reimburse. So we don't have to pay $10,000 a month for our medication, which makes a massive difference. And you also have to go through a process. So you've got to do this and then do your methotrexate, which was terrible, and do various things before you can even get to that medication. And so you're trying to turn off the bit of the immune system that's causing the problem, but we don't really know what that is and how to turn it off. And we can't turn the whole thing off. So it's just really tricky.
Just to say there as well, one of the good things about medicine is its great skill is in treating acute issues. It's not quite as strong in treating chronic health issues. And so for me, it's turned out really quite driven by food intolerances. But if you go to a rheumatologist, they're not interested in that. It's not their area.
Mm.
And you go to a dietitian and they say, well, we'll just put you on a keto diet. And you go, okay, but that actually makes me worse.
So you almost have to manage the specialist because each of the specialists
100%.
has...
Totally.
100%.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say is that you actually need to be your biggest advocate. And I read somewhere else where a guy said, if you've got a chronic health issue, that's your job. That's your job. You get up every day and you manage your chronic health issue, and then you do other things if you can.
So how have you done that? We've got a GP in the room, so you've used Google, which I know GPs love it when patients use Google.
Yeah. Well,
We don't mind it as long as we all come with an open mind to the conversation.
well, I think that's one of the upsides of our age is that you can get on and you can watch a lecture from a professor of Johns Hopkins University. You can educate yourself, and you need to.
And you find that helpful?
Oh, 100%. You have to. You have to have an advocate for your issue. I can say this because I've spent a lot of time around doctors and dealt with a lot of doctors and family things and whatever. But the truth is, in a wider sense, doctors are mechanics for the body. Right? They're just a mechanic. When you take your car down and you say it squeaks when you turn like this, and they go, oh, we couldn't find it, and they send you on your way, and you drive around the corner and it goes again. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
The medical system is under a lot of pressure. They've got short times. They're trying to get as many patients seen as they can. It's under a lot of pressure, the system. And so chronic health doesn't fit the system. So you have to be your own advocate or find someone who's really useful with you. I have had a pretty rough time navigating the medical system, and I've got the best inside track anyone can have, right? Dr. Kath can explain it to me and say, no, we're not going to that person. Let's go to that person. And I found it an incredibly complex and difficult thing. And so that's what I want to say is that if you do have that, it is your number one priority, because if you fall apart with your health, you can't do anything else. And so you as a person, you as for me, in my case, a husband, a dad, a Christian, a minister of the gospel, that all goes down the plug hole if your health goes. And so no one benefits. And so I've got to be relentless. And you do have to be absolutely relentless. If you're not getting an answer, you don't have to be adversarial, but you've got to go in and get the answer.
And understand that maybe the person you're talking to, they might not have the answer, so you're going to have to go to someone else, and that's not necessarily kind of writing off that person. Yeah.
No.
And because there's no money in studying diet, because no one's going to get a patent medication out of it, no one studies the impact of diet on chronic diseases. So it's hit and miss a little bit. And so it's been really tricky to navigate because there's not what I would consider good medical information about it. It's kind of, I tried this and it worked. Okay, let's try that. So that makes it difficult from a medical point of view.
Let's move to the mental side of it, the emotional side, but also particularly the Christian faith side of it. I'll start with you, Kath. How have you found supporting Andrew? You're married to someone who's going through something pretty traumatic that's ongoing. How have you found that?
Has its ups and downs. It's tough because you have to watch someone you love go through a lot of pain and you can't help them. And particularly, I've said this to Andrew before, in the beginning, I think I'm a bit more at peace with it now, but I felt like I should be able to fix it. That's what I do. I fix things for people and I couldn't fix it. And I found that really, really difficult. You've just got to take it to the Lord in prayer. There's no other option. You just have to support as best you can. I think for Andrew as well, he is someone who likes to do that research stuff. And so supporting him in that and navigating that together has been a good way that I've been able to support him. But it's tricky. And it can be tricky as well because if Andrew's having a bad day, he can't take the kids to sport. And that can be a little bit unreliable sometimes. Now we're much more on track, but certainly in the beginning, I'd have to do a lot of that physical hands-on stuff in terms of parenting, which was tricky. But it's really tough to watch the person you love be in pain and not to be able to fix that for them. And yet you've just got to bring it to God and know that He's sovereign and I'm not, and I don't understand it, and try and drop that trying to understand part of your brain and just be there to support. And keep communicating. What do you need? What can we do? How can we change things? And being flexible. And I think realizing as well, and maybe this comes more into the ministry sphere of things, but we're not going to be a family that looks like other families. We never were because we're us and we're in ministry, and that's different to start with. But just realizing that our family is going to look different, and that's okay.
Just to ask you a little bit further on that, as a minister's wife, was that something that you, because you can't do as much as maybe other ministry families, is that something you particularly wrestled with? Or early on you were able to just say, look, I've got to give up any ideas of living up to people's expectations?
Yeah, I think maybe God had prepared us for that. Our youngest was diagnosed with autism before we got Andrew's diagnosis. And so we already had, that word capacity is really helpful. We already had a decreased capacity. Particularly when he was younger, it was very difficult for us to have people over after church because he had had enough of people and he just needed to go and run around, and it was really difficult to do that for him. So I think for us, now that I think about it, maybe God had been kind in giving us that timing where we already had a different capacity because of our family. I think it helps that we're at quite a small church, so there's not lots of people to have to minister to. We don't have to have stacks of people over all the time who we don't know very well. We know everyone really well from church. So I think there's lots of things that God in his kindness has given us to help that. But yeah, you can't do as much. And as I said, that's just what it is.
Having preached at your church a few times and spoken to the people there, I know how much they appreciate the way that you love them. The world is becoming wealthier and wealthier. Since the turn of the century, the net worth of many countries in the West and in Asia has tripled. Poverty rates have fallen, and life expectancy has increased by more than 6 years. At the same time, the divide between rich and poor has increased, with the richest 1% owning almost 50% of all the world's wealth. 5 to 10% of people still live in extreme poverty, even in the most affluent nations. Furthermore, while money can buy happiness, it can only do so up to a certain point. And wealthier people are more likely to be less generous and less kind to others. How, as Christians, should we think about affluence? Is material prosperity a blessing or a curse or both? Given the state of the world and income equality, what are we to do with the riches God has given us? We'd love you to join us on the 21st of August when Michael Jensen, rector of St Mark's Anglican Darling Point, will help us to see our earthly treasure the way our Heavenly Father does. And now let's get back to our program. Just Andrew in particular, we've talked about the physical side of things, and we've touched on the mental side. Do you want to say a little bit about 7 years of difficulty? Jacob would have married Rachel by this time, or Joseph would be out of prison or whatever, but you're still dealing with it. Do you want to talk about the emotional side, but also the faith side?
The emotional side, Pete. I only have one emotion. It's varying levels of anger, Pete. No. So in the emotional side, look, I suppose I'm a fairly practical kind of guy. And so I'd never had that, woe is me, or why is this stuff. And I think part of it is once you get to a certain age and you deal with ministry. So when we're at St Peters is a place where people wear their brokenness pretty upfront. It's a certain area of Sydney. It's not hidden behind a veneer of middle-class suburbia, right? So people are pretty upfront and broken. And I think having been in ministry for 15 years or whatever to this point, you know that people are broken and brokenness happens. And so I've never had this point where, woe is me and why is it? To be honest, I was kind of relieved that I went, no, that makes sense. And for me, it's not so much that it is, it's that it doesn't make sense. That's the part I find. Like, why are all these things happening? Like, all the symptoms made no sense until you put this one thing in the middle and you go, wow, this was running from one end of the spectrum. It covered everything and all these weird ailments that you thought were unrelated. And suddenly they related and it made sense to me. So that side of things I don't think was ever an issue. I think probably it was more of an issue in terms of capacity. I think that's where it's hard not to feel guilty about things where you go, I should be doing more and I want to be doing more. And there are times where I'm raring to go, but the body can't, just can't. And you go, that sucks. So I used to measure how bad it was. Could I walk to the shops, which is about 1 kilometre? Could I walk around the block? Could I walk to the letterbox? And I had numerous times where I couldn't walk to the letterbox. It was that bad. And admittedly, our letterbox is 50 metres. It's a big property, but still, it's not very far, right? Like, it was that bad. So I had to learn how to do things differently. The best way to describe it is imagine having inflammation everywhere. It just goes crazy. And so sometimes it's in the back of my eyes and my vision goes a little bit. And so I can't read or write. So you just got to find different ways of doing things. And so audio stuff has been a great blessing for me. And fortunately, I'm someone who can write a talk in my head. So I've had times where you just curled up on the floor, writing your sermon in your head and just ready to go come Sunday. Okay, let's do it. So it has been difficult that way. In terms of faith, I think it's just had practical applications where I've had to rejig how to do things. So some days I just find it really difficult to physically read a Bible, which is why we're in such a blessed age where you can do podcasts instead that day. Or, I mean, you can even find people doing morning and evening prayer if you want to do that. Like, there's so many options in such a way. So I'm really thankful for that. So we've just got to do things differently. In terms of my Christian faith, I'm going to relate it to ministry. One of the upsides of being at a small church is you have very few resources. Having been in a bigger church when we first came out of college, I actually think that's kind of easier because if you've got enough resources that if you make a little bit of a mistake, it's okay. The family leaves, and that's not good, but life goes on. Whereas when you're a little church, you've got no resources, you've got no backup, you can't make a mistake. You lose a family and then suddenly you're in a big hole, right? So you've got to have massive clarity over what's really important, what do we really need to do, what are we going to say no to? And I think that's probably having the courage, first above all, to say no to a lot more things. It's not easy to do and you don't want to do it, but you need to do it if you're going to do the important things. You've got to say no to these other what are apparently urgent things. So in a ministry sense, that related to my physical health, I had to say no to a lot of things. So I could do the things that I knew were really important. But then also having limited energy did give me a chance to reflect on the very essence of being a faithful Christian. What does that look like? What does that look like for me? What is at the very essence of being a faithful minister of the gospel in this parish? What must I do if I'm genuinely going to do this? What would be nice, but we're not doing it right now, or we'll do it differently. And so in some ways, it was actually very clarifying. And I think it really helped me to let go of worrying about what other people may think about it. Not that I'd suffered particularly badly from that, but we all want to do well because we like what we do. We think it's important. I think we all care what our colleagues think, and rightly, there's an appropriateness to that. I mean, there's obviously limits to it as well, but I just got used to it going, it's not going to look like anyone else's, but that's okay because in the end, this is what the Lord's given me. So this is what I should serve with. And there's no point complaining about, there's no upside to it. I remember Peter Jensen saying that. He used to plan out his days and he used to try and remember whoever walked through his door was the person the Lord had given him to serve. And there's an element to that, trusting in the sovereignty of God and his providence, that you go, did God give me a small parish to match the illness, or did God give me the illness to match a small parish? It doesn't matter in the end. By nature, I'm a person who likes to crack on with things and change things and whatever, but in God's grace, probably been a better minister at that location because of it. So that's right. But also I would say it's helped me grow in my understanding of the scriptures and the gospel. And particularly, I think I get the Psalms now, finally. Unsurprisingly, I'm not naturally a poetry kind of guy. And I always wanted to love the Psalms because I saw older Christians I really regarded well who had a deep love for the Psalms. And I kind of wanted that. Now I appreciate them, I think, on a level that I didn't before. And the other thing, I mean, you're aware of this because I've talked to you about it, but it's interesting how you read the scriptures with a different lens now. Is that when I read, well, sort of halfway through a series in the book of Acts, or coming back to this year, just reading how many times they get it wrong, right? Like they get beaten, stoned, thrown out of town, they choose the wrong place, the Holy Spirit stops them from going in there. I mean, we all talk about the church growth bits, about it went from 5,000 and 8,000, and we all talk about that side, but no one talks about the other side of the coin. I mean, most of the time it was disappointing. Most of the time Paul had to go back. Immature, people left and persecution came. Like, I think we sort of read it with a certain lens, and maybe that's not entirely the most accurate historical kind of thing. And so I think it's given me a new lens for that. I think I've matured in my understanding of the scriptures and just how they relate to being faithful before the Lord. Because in the end, that's what matters. It doesn't actually matter. It's nice that other people think well of your Christianity. And I mean that in terms of Christianity, not what they think of me. They've got to make that a little bit of a distinction there. But that's not what drives you, right? Like if you've been given this by the Lord, then that's how you should serve. Be as faithful as you can with what you've been given. And that's it. That's all you've got.
Andrew, you and I, we sat next to each other at Moore College for 4 years. There's a sense in which you're at college, you're preparing for ministry, you're excited, you want to go out and change the world. Was there sort of a sense of loss as And I presume it happens to all of us. Our ideals have to give way to reality. But was that more acute for you as you realized, like, all the things that I thought about at college, this is what I'll do, this is what I'll achieve, gave way?
Yeah. And I mean, we were at college at a particular time as well. So we finished in 2007. So 2008, 2009 was the great age of the church planters, and everyone was going to be a church planting church. Like everyone was going to take on the world, and evangelicalism was the flavour of the day. How the world has changed in the last 16 years or whatever it is. So, yeah, everyone was a bit influenced by that. And it was a really positive time. We came through college where it was a real high watermark of students. We had 110 in our first year. We had 30 plus candidates for ordination in our year. It was an exciting time. It was under Peter Jensen when we were talking about mission, where we were doing. And so it was a really optimistic time. And so, yeah, I think having home church, having been Christchurch Gladesville and having been there when the evangelical churches were planted up the coast, having come through with a cohort who came into college, like it was fantastic times, really an immense blessing. And so, yeah, this is the other side of life under the sun, I think. But I think you're more mature and wise because of it. I think it helps you to see things as they really are. Like I said, I think you take off the rose-coloured glasses a bit. And I think the danger of it, without consciously being so, there's a real danger of a success mentality, which is a slightly refined version of prosperity gospel. It's not the crassness of the 80s, the more you give, the more you live. It's not just, well, your best life now with Jesus. It's that if you do all these things and you're really faithful, then Jesus will bless your ministry. And if it's not growing, there's something wrong. And I think it helped me to grow up a bit. And one of the things I've really encouraged people to do is read biographies of previous Christians. I tend to not read modern books. In fact, the only modern book I've read in recent times is a biography of Marcus Sloane, which I highly recommend to people. Because, again, it's just sanctified common sense from outside your age. And I think our age suffers a little bit from a lack of personal piety. I think that's assumed, and that's a bad assumption. And I think there was a sense to them of their genuine sense of their standing before the Lord that maybe we've lost a little bit in their faithfulness. And that's what mattered, not what the world thought, and not success in the world's eyes. Now, every age has its weaknesses, but that's one of their strengths, I think, that can speak to our age, which is good.
And do you think your experience helped you feel the value of that or grasp the value of that?
Yeah. I just think it helps you grow up. You realise stuff like, when you're a kid, you want to be a footballer and have the world's adulation, and you sort of grow up a bit and you see those grown men now who are younger than us, but children in men's bodies, right? There's something very juvenile about that life. And needing the affirmation of strangers, really quite juvenile. And yet that's been the story of social media, right? Like all these people you don't know affirming you. Whereas the people under your nose, the relationships you've been given, that's where the Lord's put you to serve. And so it doesn't have to be pretty or impressive in the world's eyes. It's just got to be genuine expression of your relationship with God and the people around you, that kind of thing. So I think it did help that. And like I said, I think in a weird way, I kind of aged prematurely. But there's a certain point in your life where you realise you're no longer a person of potential, great potential. Do you know what I mean? When we were at college, we were still people of potential. And then suddenly you go, no, I think we've maxed out here. I've run out of time. I've run out of energy. I've got kids. I don't have time to chase that. I can't be as obsessive about something that at that time would have been important and now is relatively trivial. So I think for me, I've kind of jumped forward a little bit. Premature aging is probably the best way of describing it. And so I think it has brought a level of maturity. So like on Sunday mornings, each Sunday there's a 90-year-old and Maureen comes in and we have a chat about how bad her arthritis was this week and what medication she's on this week. And it brings a level of genuine empathy. It's like, having kids will be difficult, but you know it a whole lot more differently this side of it. And so similarly, I think I'm much better at empathising with people in their challenges and difficulty and the brokenness of this world in a way that I didn't really understand before. Which doesn't mean you back away from the importance of what the Lord calls us to and standards and those sorts of things. But I think it gives you a capacity to be truly gracious in a way that maybe I certainly didn't have the same level of maturity to do that in the past.
Let's think about caring for friends, family who might similarly suffer from chronic health issues. Kath, what are your tips and recommendations? So if listeners have friends or family members, think about caring for other people.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is, as Andrew's been saying, it's kind of a normal part of living in this broken world, whether it's come early or come later, realizing that it is part of living in a broken world. I think that helps just to normalize it. Is that a good phrase? Just to care for them as people. The other thing is find yourself a good GP, find yourself a good whatever you need, physio, find yourself a good dietitian if that's what you need. Find those health professionals who can help and who understand what that person is going through. For us, it's been an amazing chiropractor who's really helped Andrew move. And just find those people to support people in their walk. I think the other thing is just communicating. What do you need? Not imposing, this is what I think would be helpful, but what would you need? And just walking at their speed.
Literally.
yeah, I know. I had to slow down how fast I walk. But yeah, like walking with them. Yeah, maybe they can't do bushwalks like we used to, but that's okay. Let's find another way. Let's have coffee overlooking the bush or whatever. Just find other ways of doing things that are still enjoyable and still relating, even if they're physically not able. So I guess that's physical health. Mental health is a different kettle of fish in that sometimes people don't know what they want or need. And so sometimes you just need to do something. And even if it's not the right thing, if you do something, sometimes that gets things moving. So they may not want to go and talk to someone about it, and you might just need to drive them to the GP and put them in that room. And that's going to be a good thing in the long run. Yeah, it's difficult, but keep communicating. I think that's probably the best thing to say for the carer. Keep asking, what can we do? What can we change? And being okay with things not being what you thought they were. I mean, as Andrew said, let's grow up. Like it's not, I'm not going to be a professional swimmer. Not that was ever on the cards, but that's life. These things happen, and it doesn't make the relationship any less just because the person has different physical capabilities than they used to.
I was going to just quickly say to that as well, on the mental health side of things, well, just your health generally, there's some really practical first steps. The most important thing is, what is your sleep like? Like if your sleep's no good, the chances of mental health following are higher, much higher. So if you're having trouble sleeping and you're not feeling great, see what you can do to sort that out. That's the number one thing you can do.
Is that something that was true in your case?
Well, I think it's worth saying I haven't particularly struggled with anxiety or depression, although people with mine do. I had a particular medication that didn't go well that pushed things that way. And as soon as we stopped that, it was like, okay, so I'm probably a little different that way. But in my case, my poor sleep was absolutely making the autoimmune worse. Yeah, absolutely. Nothing is improved by bad sleep in life. Nothing, right? Like, honestly. And I would say that even for people, if you're just feeling a bit run down, like not even if you classify yourself as mental health, sleep hygiene, we're realizing it's so important, and it's getting worse when people are spending time on screens and all those things. So sleep hygiene. Second thing is getting a little bit of exercise, and by getting outside, like getting in sunlight, fresh air, walk around, like even walking around, your eyes scan, and so it triggers your vagus nerve. It'll help you relax. There's something about that physical getting outside, getting moving. So that's that exercise and sunlight in that. Particularly if you start to age, or if you do have some sort of chronic health, like diet's really important. Like I can absolutely make myself sick in a moment. Like I could literally, if you gave me a really sugary thing, I could put my hand in front of you now and it would swell on the table. Like it's that bad. But again, as you age, your body just doesn't deal with things like it used to. And so there's a wisdom in maybe really taking some time. You know, in your 20s, you can eat whatever you like. Your 30s, you just don't worry about the weight you're putting on. And then suddenly you need to think about that. And the fourth one is the importance of social relationships and face-to-face social relationships, you know, not this online sort of stuff all the time. We're social beings, and it's so important for your mental health. There's so many times where you get out and spend time with people and you just feel a bit better because of it, even if you weren't feeling great on the way in. So I would say that. So those things, I would say most of us of a certain age probably need to think about, have a bit of a plan for those things anyway, but especially if you're really struggling with something you think is either chronic health or heading that way, do that. The last thing I want to say in terms of caring for people who have it, I think being patient, listening, helping advocate for them, because sometimes they're not going to be able to do it for themselves. They're just not got the energy to deal with a doctor. So if you've got a spouse who's dealing with an issue, it might be really good if you can go with them.
Mm.
And particularly if you go to a specialist, because a specialist just download a bunch of information on you and you go, hang on a second, I'm just dealing with the fact you told me I had a disease, and you walk out and you don't remember the next hour. I mean, particularly if it's something like cancer or something serious. So going with them so you can help go, no, that's not what they said. They said this, this, and this. That really helps, that little bit of support and advocacy in that one. And finally, I know it's well-meaning, but don't try and offer people solutions that you like.
Good.
If one more person tells me to take turmeric, there's going to be a serious laying on of hands, right? Like, I'm on some serious medication. I'm aware of, yes, there's those options, but I've done more research on it than, to be honest.
Most specialists.
Well, yeah,
Yes.
particularly, and I appreciate, I'm only trying to solve a case of one, right?
Yeah.
They've got to go, well, what works in 90, 95% of cases? But if you're in the 5 or 10%, you don't care what works in the others. I'm just trying to solve one problem. And I know what things at this point, after 6 years of spending a lot of my time thinking about it, dealing with specialists and finally doing my research. So that's all I'd say. I know it comes from a well-meaning place, but if someone's having a rough week, it's like your wife doesn't necessarily want you to solve her problem. She just wants you to listen. It's that kind of thing. Don't, because it doesn't help.
Final question for you, Andrew, and just sort of taking a slightly different angle. There are some pastors who listen to this podcast. As a pastor, what would you say to other pastors in terms of how they might pastor people in their congregations with chronic health issues? Is there anything particular you want to say in that context?
Look, I mean, people often ask about specialist pastoral ministry. So being at St Peters, we've had a reasonable amount of experience, say, with transgender issues and same-sex attraction as well to some degree. And so people ask, well, how do you minister? And you go, well, pastoral ministry isn't complicated. It's just be gracious, listen to what they've got to say so you understand their story and their context and where they came from. Be gracious. Don't be afraid with the word of God, but be gracious in it. And how do I help this person follow Jesus and follow it the best they can and well? And that's, let's say, so with chronic health, it's very difficult to convey to someone how crushing it can get, to the point where, like I said, I've never suffered depression as such, but I certainly had a medication that basically was, I have to take this injection, and for the next week I was, can't go on, this is terrible. It was rough, right? So I'm assuming that's pretty close to what depression feels like, which is terrible. It's pretty crushing. So be gentle and be patient, and it's not going anywhere in a hurry. So be gracious. I also think one of the important things to do in any of these situations is to relate at a distance that you can maintain. So there's no point saying, right, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to do everything for this person for 2 weeks and then disappear out of their life. So that's the danger with, say, someone is widowed or whatever. Everyone's there for the first 3 weeks after the death, and then they're on their own. So I think choose a relational distance that you can go the distance on. It's like running a marathon. You don't run like you're running 200 meters. So I think pick a level of engagement that you can maintain. It might be, look, I give them a call every second week, or it might be I'll call them every week, or whatever your thing is, or I might see, I drop by on the way home, or I do whatever. But just those little levels of contact that say, hey, I'm here, how are you going? You know, you can talk to me if you need. It opens an opportunity for them to talk, because more often than not, they don't even have the energy to deal with life, let alone trying to start up conversations and start up things. So I think just being gracious and taking the initiative, I think, and understanding that that's not always going to be a good response or an immediate response. But in the end, that's pastoral ministry, isn't it? We're just trying to help people follow Jesus faithfully. It's really not that complicated generally. But also knowing the limits of that, like you're not a psychologist, you're not a GP, you're not there to do those things. Quite often people come, I'm having depression or whatever, and first thing I say to them, have you spoken to your GP? Have you done this and this? Can I help you do those things? And then we start talking about things of the Christian faith, and they're quite surprised and say, I didn't expect this is how this conversation would go. And you go, but a lot of people still have a kind of platonic split up of themselves as a person, like the spiritual here and the material there. And you go, that's not really a biblical view of personhood. And so just caring for a person, not overly complicated that way.
Can I add to that? This has just reminded me of, I know I've been saying listen to the person and see what they want, but I remember listening to a podcast, and I apologise to the people involved. I can't remember who it was. I think it was Australian. Anyway, someone with chronic fatigue who said, sometimes actually I don't know what I want, and occasionally a friend drops in and just cleans the bathroom for me without asking, and that's wonderful. So some of it is listening, some of it is watching, just being prepared to step in and do something if it seems like that would be helpful. They can always say, please don't do that.
Andrew and Kath, thank you very much for being on the podcast. Very helpful and very appreciate your time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
To benefit from more resources from the Centre for Christian Living, please visit ccl.more.edu.au, where you'll find a host of resources, including past podcast episodes, videos from our live events, and articles published through the Centre. We'd love for you to subscribe to our podcast and for you to leave us a review so that more people can discover our resources. On our website, we also have an opportunity for you to make a tax-deductible donation to support the ongoing work of the Centre. We always benefit from receiving questions and feedback from our listeners, so if you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at ccl@more.edu.au. As always, I'd like to thank Moore College for its support of the Centre for Christian Living, and to thank my assistant Karen Bellhartz for her work in editing and transcribing the episodes. The music for our podcast was generously provided by James West.